Loading, and we're live with James Elrich. Am I pronouncing that right, James?
It's
Ehrlich?
close. It's really close. It's Ehrlich.
Ehrlich.
Unless you're in Germany and it's pronounced Ehrlich,
Ehrlich.
which means honest or trustworthy. So it's a
Hmm.
German heritage name.
It's a cool last name. My last name means a tree, some kind of tree. But I love trees. I think they're my favorite animal in the animal kingdom.
Okay.
What's your spirit animal, James?
Oh gosh, I'm not quite sure. I love all creatures. I think pretty much, except for mosquitoes
Oh yeah.
and ticks and other kinds of parasites. But other than that, yeah, I'm pretty wide open.
So I had an entrepreneur on my podcast 2 weeks ago. He developed an IoT device to actually spot mosquitoes. It laser points mosquitoes, and not only am I going to buy one of his device, but probably going to invest in this company. But because I very much hate mosquitoes as well. James, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit more about ReGen and yeah, what you've been up to as of late.
Sure. So I am James Ehrlich, or Ehrlich, whatever you want to say. I am Director of Compassionate Sustainability at the Stanford University School of Medicine in what's called the Center for Compassion, Altruism, Research, and Education, CCARE, under Dr. James R. Doty, MD. And it's a wonderful cohort and group of people who are focused on living better, healthier, happier lives. And so there's wonderful sort of effective neuroscience research on simple practices even that can just improve, reducing stress and living in peace with yourself and with others. So that's one part of the hat that I wear. Another one is that I've been at Stanford since 2012, and my background has been a serial entrepreneur before I came to Stanford, and even sort of during in creating a spin-off company from the research that we've been doing. And so we have a Stanford spin-off company that I founded back in 2016, and it's a Dutch holding company called ReGen Villages. And we have a software stack that we've been developing called the Village OS, which is to apply machine learning software to the Gen AI design and Edge AI operation eventually of self-reliant neighborhoods around food, water, energy, waste resource management, connectivity to passive homes, energy positive homes, smart mobility solutions, pretty much you name it, in terms of holistic, whole system design thinking about how we live and where we live that can be flourishing and abundant. So that also then, of course, feeds into my work back at Stanford in terms of how we live and where we live that can reduce amygdala response and cortisol release for
Oh, I
health.
love that. I love that. We're gonna double click on that first one, but first let's start with compassionate sustainability. Like, aren't both the same? And what happens when you unite both words?
It's a really good question, and people are, sometimes stumble on both of those words. How to be more compassionate, how to be more sustainable. I personally have moved on from the word sustainability in many ways because I think that was a word that was applied with some meaning maybe 50, 60 years ago in terms of the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, these kinds of things. And now, in terms of being sustainable, we have to be thinking much more in terms of regenerative and resilient, right? So what can we do to design and implement systems which over a period of time can actually improve and create the circumstances for human and planetary flourishing. So that's on that side. The compassion side really is, it's really akin to access an agency that, in other words, that if you have connectivity to your natural resource flows, as we used to have on Earth, right, that all of a sudden your health improves. When you're in community with people and there's a sense of abundance and surplus, then there's also this spurring of generosity. There's a feeling, in other words, that we're not alone, that we're in this thing together, and it is a use of compassionism, if you will, as a model for where I hope where the world is going to lead, especially with technological interventions like robots and sensing and AI and all of these things. So that's the marriage of the two things together.
Okay. And what is compassion? Because coming back to my favorite spirit animal, the tree, it's sustainable for sure. Is it compassionate though? It will sometimes block other trees.
Okay, so part of our work and our research and our effort in designing and developing this Village OS software platform is inspired in many ways by this fantastic research from Dr. Suzanne Simard from the University of British Columbia, who, in part of her team, also they coined this term, the Wood Wide Web, as opposed to the World Wide Web, when they actually discovered that under the forest floor, there are these threads, these sort of, maybe you've seen these sort of white fibers when you dig into the soil a little bit. These are mycelial networks, right? And they're very large organisms. They're mushroom organisms, fungal organisms. And these fungi organisms essentially are sentient beings. They're very large. They can span 30, 40 radial kilometers maybe in size. They're intelligent, but they don't have a central brain. So they have intelligence at the point of sensing. And then what they do is they inoculate into the root system of plants and trees and bushes and cultivars across all that vast distance. And they are, I like to say, Mother Earth's original kind of crypto ledger, because it is a broker. It's basically communicating through the soil what the needs are of the entire ecosystem. So it's a have-need network, and it's conveying carbon, minerals, sugar, phosphorus, nitrogen, all these different wonderful goodies, including water, across those distances. And so then there's a little commission that the mycelial network makes. But to your point, there is a connected sort of neural network that exists on planet Earth. It's the oldest sort of terrestrial organism is the mushroom. 30% of our DNA is really mycelial in a way. If you look at a brain scan, for instance, and neurons in the brain, it looks just like a mycelial network. Most recently, at a cosmological scale, I'd say maybe within the last 10 years, they've been simulating what does dark matter look like across galaxies. And interestingly enough, it looks just like a mycelial network or brain scan. So there's again, we are not isolated beings. So when you talk about the tree being your spirit creature or sentient being, it's not too far off. We really are interconnected in such a way.
Yeah, well, what I love about trees, they do fight in some way, but they're very long term, right? Like a tree, a sequoia might be there when you won't, So, and yet they seem to have some kind of some wisdom. They produce oxygen. They remove CO2. They provide shade. They cool down houses and so forth, which is pretty much what you're into, I guess, with the ReGen villages. But yeah, the mycelium is fascinating, right? And it's fun that you keep making parallels between AI and LLMs and neural networks, because these things are also very much mycelium-like. And talking about mycelium, have you looked into psilocybin and how humans may take that and or interaction with these shrooms?
Well, maybe you're familiar with a sort of brilliant thought leader named Paul Stamets.
Yes.
But I'm a huge, Stamets fanboy. I'll just put it out there. And there's this theory that he even talked about on the Joe Rogan show once about what's called the stoned monkey theory, which was that when the primates came down from the trees, right, in our ancestry, and they were roaming the savanna, some of the food that they were finding was the psilocybin buttons growing out of the scat from other animals, which is where psilocybin comes from, right? And so the mushrooms they were eating. Now, you can see that at some point there was this huge spike in consciousness and human ability and intelligence. And so they were trying to figure out exactly, when in history that this actually happened. And so there's this theory that the primates came down, they started ingesting the psilocybin, tripping out pretty good on these things, and being able to, as part of what we've discovered in this understanding of what psilocybin does, is it creates new neural pathways, and so therefore new intelligence or new creativity, if you will, can emerge. And if you look at a lot of the primitive cave paintings and things like this on the cave walls, there was a lot of discussion, or images, I should say, on the use of psilocybin and mushrooms, and that's where a lot of this artwork was coming from as well. So yeah, there's definitely a thread in terms of human evolution, in terms of these receptors that we've built, both for psilocybin and cannabinoid receptors as well. So there's a relationship to these other natural systems, things that we ingested over eons. So yeah, I find that our work is based on what's called biomimicry, right? So it's focusing on these patterns in nature, whether it's the golden ratio, Fibonacci scale kinds of design thinking, but that there's a lot of information that is sacred and that is empowering who we are, that as we remind ourselves about these things, that they actually simplify how we're able to then design these kinds of communities of the future, and how people can live in much more balance with where things are produced to where they're consumed. And that's a big topic for us, by the way, resiliency.
Yes, and we're gonna get to that. But yeah, it's quite fascinating, right? Because us humans, I think we're individualistic creatures nowadays, but historically we were very much more communal. When you take these substances, you also feel not only a greater connection with your next human being, right? Like oxytocin and all these things, but also to nature, right? Like really understood and had deep insights about Mother Nature while I was on 5-Neo DMT. Shout out to Joe Rogan for giving me that idea a couple of years ago. And yeah, I think these are the communities of the future. Like you said, way too much cortisol, right? Not enough serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin in cities. Why have we gone in that direction? Is it like the industrial revolution and trying to accumulate as much good as possible? Why are we like grouping up like sardines in big cities like New York, noisy cities, stressful cities, right?
Well, if you look at any city around the world, to be perfectly honest, it didn't start as a mega city. It started as more than
trade
likely,
hub, right?
Well, it started as a village on waterways, because that's where access to trade was. Exactly right. And then more and more people would come, and so they had to organize themselves, which of course made sense, and to figure out the best ways to organize themselves in that regard. Like Manhattan, for instance, was originally designed. A lot of people don't know this, but it was a Dutch holding. It was owned by the Dutch, and so they had canals. There were canal systems in all across, especially Lower Manhattan. Canal Street, for instance, these were these egress points for freight and things like this. Of course, it's been paved over, but they keep the Canal Street, right? So that's the starting point of cities. But then, as time has gone on and more population has come to urban areas, and there's reasons for that as well, the expansion has gone both out and up, typically, and moreover, that the distances of where things are produced to where they're consumed really started to increase, which also then creates a lot of brittle infrastructure, whether it's energy systems, water systems, waste, but also where our food is coming from. And more at the same time, subdivisions are paving over urban edge, suburban farmland. And so that's pushing out where our food is coming from even further. So this is the history, if you will. And I talk about this in my lectures about Mesopotamia. But I talk about also a community that lived actually 3,000 years before Mesopotamia, 6,000 years ago, in the area around Ukraine and Moldova. These were Trupillians, and the Trupillians Not a lot of people know about these folks, but they have these huge communities, tens of thousands of people living in these circular communities where their primary focus was on soil health. So they had animal husbandry, but what they were doing was they weren't just slaughtering those animals and eating them every day for food. No, they were mostly agrarian. They would have celebrations. Of course, they would eat meat once in a while, but for the most part, it was the dairy and the moving around of the soil with the hooves and the aerating of the soil, then the scat and things like this. So there's a pretty interesting historical piece then. If you look at the soil quality, the richest, most organic, fertile soil in the world, the breadbasket in many ways is this area between Ukraine and Moldova, right? And that's the reason why it's also, I think, territorially speaking, kind of a hotbed for resource grabbing. I don't know how to put that in a politically gentle way. But in any case, the point is that the soil health there from 6,000 years ago is still there today because of the practices. Not just the mycelia, the actual layering of biomass,
minerals, and
biomass, animal waste, organic fertilizing inputs, and yes, mycelial networks as well. Absolutely.
Right. And to come back to the topic, right? Like, because I think we have a very toxic mix nowadays, which is people together stuck up in cities, very stressed, and social media. So what happened? How did we get there? How could we fix that?
Okay, so this is exactly, I was born and raised in New York City. And so just to throw that out there, I'm an urban guy. I'm nothing against people, my family, my friends who still live in New York or San Francisco or other urban places. But when I moved out after my undergrad from NYU to Northern California, and by the way, I started back then a video game company. We were working a lot with George Lucas and Industrial Light and Magic, and from Star Wars fame, doing special effects software and video game design, which is of course now connected to what we're doing with the Village OS. But I was surrounded by these small plot family farms and these really beautiful communities. And I started to do the research about eco-villages and intentional communities and co-housing and co-living. And that was about a 16, 17-year traveling around the world research initiative. I like to say it was inspired mostly by my stomach because I love to cook and I love to eat. And it's really about where this beautiful, natural, delicious, organic food is growing and being cultivated right next to where people are living. Right. And so basically it was this whole idea of stumbling on these beautiful eco-village communities. And then when I came to Stanford in 2012, I was like, wait a second, there has to be a way for us to consider using technology and software to be able to communicate with the natural world, with mycelial networks, for instance, but also being able to design and then operate these self-reliant neighborhoods and townships and communities, right? And that's where I came into Stanford in 2012. I got involved with what was called the Solar Decathlon competition, and I was a researcher and lecturer and coach for that, 2013. And really, it was this beautiful idea of the single self-sustaining or energy positive house. But when you interconnect many of them together, even like, 10, 15, 20 of them, whatever, you start to get a power plant. You get a network effect of surplus power. And that was where my research led to, gosh, if we can add clean water, high yield organic food production in a fairly small footprint, waste to resource digestion, turning those into assets and reusable things like energy and fertilizer, et cetera, smart mobility solutions, other kinds of things, that we could create, if you don't mind the term, an industrialized approach to unfolding these kinds of communities out in the world at a faster pace, both at the urban edge near cities and suburbs, but also even further out to stem climate migration in rural areas and to start to draw rings of poverty maybe back out from the urban areas to peri-urban and rural, and also dealing with refugee crisis. So we're this mission-driven Stanford spinoff that is focusing on machine learning software to solve literally solve these problems. Design, implement, manage those kinds of neighborhoods.
Right. And isn't that called permaculture, but like on steroids if you're building it?
I love that you brought up the term permaculture. It is, this wonderful gentleman, Bill Mollison, is one of the, the pillars of this design thinking. And it's only relatively from like the 1970s, this idea of the study of permanent culture or permaculture, which is how can you look at land, really kind of walk the land and study it to a certain extent and understand what it is capable of from a natural resource flow and capacity perspective, right? And like the recent thinking, and I really love the work of Jeff Lawton, for instance, he goes to these extreme places around the world, like in Jordan and, Wadi Rum and in Saudi Arabia and other places. And he takes completely, denuded, desertified land, and not only converts it into bioproductive over a short period of time, but it also, he's been able to show how that work starts to stimulate microclimates and starts to regreen the whole areas around it. So I like to say, based on the research from these other people, my quote really is, if you take a half a step towards Mother Earth, she'll literally throw her arms around you. Yeah. And that's my philosophy.
Yeah, and that's great. And as every great entrepreneur, it's sort of naive, right? Because we know that the economics of doing that is quite hard, and we need the economics to make sense for scale. So what kind of problems have you been hitting so far on the economics / scale of things?
Yeah, so basically it's as follows. It's not about a matter of technology or capability for us to do these things. It's simply a matter of, and I say simply, a matter of money and political will. And often, when the money is there, the political will, not all the time, but the political will can be morphed to accommodate for these innovations. And no matter however you look at it, whether it's Uber or what Elon did with Tesla in terms of fast charging stations and reinventing the electric drive chain and train in a certain way in terms of marketing perspective. So what are the obstacles we face really are traditional rule sets for planning conditions, which can take decades if you're even allowed to build something there. So there's a pain point there. And we really feel, again, that software can help to change those rules. And then the other part really is the greed. How do we balance providing a reasonable rate of return for investors, for residential real estate investors especially, where they get a certain level of rate of return plus a certain annualized rate of return, but it also allows for social affordable mix in those communities. So we can start to really address the biggest pain points we have right now on Earth, which is a lack of dignified housing inventory that is accessible for people, human beings, to move into. And because they are immediately disqualified because they don't have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to afford to live like this.
Right. And my brain is telling me, like, Neo, just go in Saudi, build something ludicrously well-funded there in an arid environment. What do you think about that brain blur?
I've been really blessed, I want to tell you, in the last year plus to have visited the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia 4 times, and just in the last year. And I will tell you, it is some of the most wonderful human beings, people on earth, very kind, incredibly hospitable, and progressive in the way they're designing and thinking about their citizenry for the future. Okay, the investments that the Crown Prince is making for Vision 2030 and now going into Vision 2040, let's say, are remarkable. And what's being planned and designed there is really, especially intended for the long-term future generations to come. So I have definitely looked into what was happening with the various mega and giga projects, including with NEOM. And I think there's a lot of incredible solutions that are going to come from this. I know they've scaled it down from the original plan, what the line used to be to what it is now, but there's still plans for it to expand in the future.
Right. Well, James, thanks for your time. My electricity just dropped. So I'm not sure how long the power is going to be on, but let's do round two pretty soon because I feel we only scratch the surface. Where can people find out more about you?
Easy to find me. It's regenvillages.com, or my email is at jamese@stanford.edu.